From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
The Justice Department's antitrust enforcers unveil their plan to remake Google and the internet search industry. Meantime, Spirit Airlines declares bankruptcy this week after the antitrust crew blocked its merger with JetBlue. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnist Alicia Finley and editorial board member Monet Ukwe-Barua. 3 months ago, in a case brought originally under the Trump administration, federal judge Amit Mehta ruled that Google had maintained an illegal search engine monopoly by paying browser developers and phone makers to become the default search option for their users. On Wednesday now, the Justice Department unveiled its remedy proposals, and Alicia, sweeping might be the best way to describe what the government is suggesting here. The Google Search, the browser Chrome, these are products that millions of Americans use every day. So maybe the best place to start is a sense of what the federal government wants to do to them.
First of all, it is proposed that it divest Google Chrome, which is its browser. And the idea here is that Chrome collects a lot of data that Google can use to improve or refine its search and also better target ads. So therefore, if you force it to divest or sell off Chrome, and there's a separate question of like who would be able to buy it. I mean, a lot of other tech companies presumably wouldn't be under the antitrust laws that the DOJ and FTC have argued for. But in any case, the idea here would be that Google would not be able to exploit this data to improve its own market position. Now, the Justice Department also throws basically the kitchen sink at Google, also saying that it should be barred from paying Apple, Mozilla, device manufacturers, and browsers for the default placement on devices or, again, in the browsers. Now, Apple's actually received about $20 billion from these payments. And the idea is, well, if consumers didn't have the default, they would potentially maybe choose Microsoft Bing or DuckDuckGo or an alternative search engine. But in most cases, as in Europe, where they've tried to eliminate that default through antitrust laws, consumer preferences generally haven't changed all that much. And these payments have actually benefited Apple and others who are competitors to Google in other respects. Now, another proposed requirement would be to block Google from acquiring, maintaining, or holding basically any kind of interest in AI or using AI to improve its products. Now, this is so sweeping, and I don't think this kind of remedy has ever been proposed before in any kind of antitrust lawsuit. But it's basically saying that you can't improve a product and basically you can't adapt to the technological advances. Now, OpenAI is now working on its own search tool. Microsoft is trying to incorporate AI and actually some of OpenAI's tools into its own search product. Now you have Amazon just announced that it wants to make a $4 billion investment in Anthropic, and you have all these other tech companies investing in AI, and Google would not be allowed to. So it's basically trying to handicap Google in this new AI race. And the idea is that over time, Google's products, its search products, and others would become less attractive, lower quality, and other competitors would be able to take advantage and leap ahead.
One of the things that's remarkable about this is that even in his ruling determining that Google had a monopoly on search, the judge suggests that he recognizes that Google is a very innovative company that puts a lot of money into improving its products and R&D. Here's a quote from the judge. Google has not achieved market dominance by happenstance. It has hired thousands of highly skilled engineers, innovated consistently, and made shrewd business decisions. The result is the industry's highest quality search engine, which has earned Google the trust of hundreds of millions of daily users. And Monet, that is a remarkable juxtaposition next to the terms that the Justice Department wants to impose on Google that would make it harder for Google to continue that kind of innovation on at least these products and improve its position. And particularly because, as Alicia Alicia lays out, there are payments that are going from Google to these device makers, including Apple. There's some product integration, maybe with Google Search and its Chrome web browser. But a lot of that has redounded to the benefit of consumers and the broader tech ecosystem. And by the way, there's no lock-in here. If you don't want to use Google, the alternatives are one click away. If you don't like the default that is set up on your iPhone or your alternative browser when you boot it up, changing that is only a few clicks away. I have a hard time seeing why consumer choice can't reign supreme here.
Exactly. I think that since the 1980s, the standard for business activity, which is considered to be illegally anti-competitive, has been, does it harm consumers? And can it be placed inside a practice on that company to harm consumers overall? But we are seeing that standard be chipped away at by a lot of these activist pro-antitrust enforcers like Jonathan Cantor at the Justice Department and certain sympathetic judges who have been willing to accept some novel lines of reasoning about the negative effects that certain business practices might have that historically have been judged to be perfectly acceptable. So nobody denies that Google is a dominant player in the search market. They also have the market-leading browser in Chrome, and they do take activities to protect their advantage. Of course, Google did meant to shore up its share of the search market by paying Apple and paying Mozilla in order to preference their search engine. But on the whole, it has been a company that has gained its market share by investing heavily in refining it and gaining the trust of a lot of users. By no means have they managed to actually fully shield themselves from competition. Actually, Google's share of the global search market declined over the course of the past year from about 93% to about 90%. So still a huge market leader, but it shows that a lot of competitors are managing to actually offer alternative products, particularly as AI enters the question. A lot of people who are doing certain types of specialized search actually are looking at competitors now more than they were, say, 5 years ago. The same thing applies to the ad market. Of course, that's how Google actually makes money on its search. A lot of businesses pay to have ads placed in the results for those searches. Google is still the largest advertiser, but as of last year, they now have less than 50% of the digital ad market. And that's the first time in more than a decade that they've fallen below that threshold. Amazon is the biggest company that's pouring a lot of resources into competing with Google in the digital ad market, and they've increased their share by a whole lot. So there's no question that Google does spend a lot of its time thinking about ways that it can protect its market share, but by no means has that harmed consumers, and it hasn't prevented a lot of other big companies from figuring out ways that they can compete in digital advertising search. And it seems like consumers are being served very well by this competition without the need for additional action by the Justice Department.
Hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Picking up on this point about the new antitrust theories, Alicia, my understanding of their argument, or at least part of it, was that especially online in the services that are free to users, their claim is that the market is undervaluing things like privacy. You know, the old line is that if you're not paying for the product, then you're the product. And there is some truth to that. Everybody knows that TV and all these services, Facebook, so forth, are run on advertising. There's data that is scraped that feeds into those advertising models. But it is remarkable to me how an administration that has advanced some of those theories in other cases is now suggesting that Google share more of its data, including user data, with rival companies, which would have some serious privacy implications. And if you dig into what the Justice Department is suggesting here, it wants the court to set up a technical committee that would determine a set of qualified competitors, and then Google would have to give access to its data to those qualified competitors. And if part of the concern here is that these free services, again, are undervaluing user privacy, setting up some sort of legal system channels through which Google is required to sluice a bunch of its data to a bunch of other companies, which might include startups. Alicia, it seems to me that there are some real serious privacy concerns there.
Right. So what it's essentially requiring is socializing the data. You mentioned that there would be supposedly some safeguards under this kind of committee, but it's hard to really believe that essentially a government set up committee would be able to have the engineering talent and actually the background to be able to parse which companies are secure and will not inappropriately use this data. If you recall the Facebook issue, I guess some people called it a scandal, in which some of the user data was being steered toward this startup Cambridge Analytica to target political ads that Donald Trump and Republicans were using. And there was a huge outrage, public outrage over this. And this is essentially what this new proposed mandate would enable in the name of essentially helping potential competitors. Now, this goes to a broader theme we've seen in antitrust law, especially under this Biden administration, but also in Europe, which has adopted a similar approach, which is that data and tools should all be interoperable. No company should be able to have an advantage. They should all have to build their products so they can seamlessly interact. So if somebody has an Apple phone, for instance, or an iPhone, that they should be able to use perhaps Kindles or Apple's iReader on it. All this data and all these functions shouldn't be contained to one company. This is kind of actually an idea of open source, which ironically that Google has pioneered with its Android software. But again, this presents a national security and privacy risks to users. Now, if users want to request that companies share their data with other companies, now that has actually been a proposal in Congress. And as it happens, financial regulators are also actually seeking to do that with banking data. That may be a different story, but I think it would still present national security and privacy concerns. For instance, if a Google user requested that their data or whatever cookies that they were storing be shared with TikTok, I think that would raise concerns. And I think it would also potentially raise CFIUS concerns that oversees national security. So it's kind of ironic that the Biden administration is trying to force these kind of remedies that in other contexts would raise red flags.
And these remedies would redound to the benefit of other big players, Microsoft, which by market capitalization is bigger than Google. Some startups like OpenAI, which seems to have an edge on the mainstream bigger players in the AI chatbot space, at least. And Monet, that's the other thing that always strikes me when looking at these antitrust cases is the conceit, if I can use that word. A bunch of very smart people in Washington can do some detailed analysis of these complicated markets, sometimes billion-dollar markets, and figure out how to move the pieces on the chessboard to make the market work a little bit more efficiently. And part of my skepticism of that is just looking at the long line of company failures, big companies that no longer exist, including in the tech space. MySpace was the dominant social media platform not that long ago. We were talking offline a few minutes ago about Internet Explorer as the dominant browser in the early internet age. I also went and found an analysis by economist Mark Perry, a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He goes a little bit wider in scope. He says only 52 U.S. companies have been on the Fortune 500 since 1955, and they include big names, household names, Hershey, ExxonMobil, Dow, Merck, Lockheed Martin, companies that you know and recognize. But here's some of them that have fallen off since 1955. American Motors, Studebaker, Zenith Electronics, Otis Elevator. Some of the companies that have been added in the meantime: Amazon, Facebook, eBay, Home Depot, Microsoft, Google, Netflix, Office Depot, Walmart. Walmart, not on the Fortune 500 in 1955. Mark Perry then says this: the fact that nearly 9 of every 10 Fortune 500 companies in 1955 have gone bankrupt, merged, reorganized, or contracted demonstrates that there's been a lot of market disruption, churning, and Schumpeterian creative destruction over the last 6 decades. And Monet, it just always strikes me that as smart as the antitrust regulators might be, it is not easy, maybe impossible, Google to see around the corners and see who might be coming up as the next Facebook, the next Google, the next Apple.
Well, the example that always sticks out in my mind is the merger of AOL and Time Warner in the early 2000s, which was heralded as potentially completely shaking the landscape of competition in the internet, which was just burgeoning as a hub for commerce at a high level, and also through media, which Time Warner was a major player in at the time. And it only took a few years for AOL's business model and its dominant position among browsers to be completely disrupted, leading to a spin-off in which the merged entity lost billions of dollars worth of value. And so it shows how quickly these industries can completely shift. And the idea that Google is in a dominant position today and has used its advantage to secure market share in some of these industries in which it competes, that could be completely different in 10 or so years from now, particularly in an industry like software and services where the barriers to entry and the barriers to innovation are very, very low. And I do think that, again, it's one more reason why the standard for an antitrust intervention should be whether the prosecutors can show that end prices to consumers have been directly increased by an anti-competitive action on the part of the company, not looking at market share as a standalone and saying this company is too big and there are too few other players or anything like that. You have to show that consumers clearly have been harmed by that in the form of increased prices and be able to demonstrate that in a conclusive way before taking any kind of definitive antitrust action.